Have you ever walked away from a conversation, frustrated because you had to explain yourself? Again, you try to justify your dreams, your decisions, your boundaries, and somehow, even after all the explaining, they still don't get it. You still feel small. But I want you to hear this. You rise the moment you stop explaining yourself. That's the moment you begin to lead your life, not live a version edited for other people's comfort. Let's be honest with ourselves when we explain our choices, our dreams, our boundaries. It's rarely just about sharing information. Most of the time, what we're really doing is reaching out for something deeper, acceptance. We want to be seen. We want to be understood. But more than that, we want someone to validate us. We want someone to say, yes, I approve. You're doing the right thing. You're allowed to be this version of yourself. That's what explaining really is. It's seeking permission disguised as justification. We grow up learning that approval is currency. As children, we're taught to ask before we speak, ask before we move, ask before we decide. Over time, we internalize a dangerous idea that someone else always has to say yes before we can step into who we are. And so we carry that into adulthood. We explain why we're leaving a relationship, even when it's hurting us. We explain why we're changing careers, even though it no longer aligns with our purpose. We explain why we're setting boundaries, as if self-respect needs a footnote. But the truth is, you don't need permission to be who you are. You don't need to make your truth easier for others to swallow. You don't owe anyone a version of yourself that fits neatly into their expectations. Think about Rosa Parks. On that winter evening in Montgomery, she didn't stand up and deliver a speech about why her body was tired or why the law was unjust. She didn't explain her past, her pain, or her plans. She simply said no, just one word. But that single quiet act of defiance carried more power than 1,000 well-reasoned arguments. That was a moment of pure conviction, unshaken, unfiltered, and unapologetic. And from that moment, a movement rose. There's something sacred about standing in your truth without defending it. It's not arrogance, it's not indifference, it's clarity. When you stop trying to get everyone to understand, something shifts inside you. You begin to realize that the ones who truly matter don't need explanations. They feel your sincerity, they see your integrity. And those who constantly demand justification, they're not listening to understand, you're explaining to people who have already decided not to see you. So who are you really living for? Are you chasing approval from people who have never walked a mile in your shoes? Are you tailoring your life for the comfort of those who wouldn't dare risk what you're risking? When you live for acceptance, you're always negotiating, always adjusting, always second-guessing. But when you stop explaining yourself, you step into a different kind of power, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen because it already knows its worth. This doesn't mean we stop communicating, it means we start discerning. Not everyone deserves to hear your why. Some people just need to hear your no. When you shift your energy away from explaining and toward living, you begin to attract people who respect your path, even if they don't fully understand it. You begin to rise, because true growth doesn't come from being accepted by others. It comes from accepting yourself. And once you've done that, you realize something profound. You were never asking for their approval. You were asking for your own. Every time you explain your decisions to someone who hasn't earned the right to hear your story, you give away something sacred. A little piece of your power, your certainty, your self-trust. It slips through your fingers in the name of being understood. And most of the time, the people you're explaining yourself to aren't trying to understand you. They're just measuring you against a version of life they're too afraid to challenge. That's like pouring water into a cup with no bottom. You keep giving and giving and giving, but it never holds anything. You never get that validation you were hoping for. You just feel more drained, more doubtful, more distant from your original clarity. We do this all the time, often without realizing. You tell someone you're leaving a stable job to follow a calling, and before the words are even out of your mouth, you start padding the truth with justifications. I have savings. I've done the research. It's not as risky as it sounds. What you're really doing is trying to make the decision less threatening. Not to you, but to them. You're trying to make your courage digestible to someone who hasn't built theirs yet. But the moment you do that, you start editing your truth. And when you edit your truth to please someone else, it's no longer truth, it's a performance. And performances exhaust us. They leave us wondering why, even after we've said all the right things and explained all the right reasons, we still feel That's because we weren't speaking from our center. We were speaking from our fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of being misunderstood. The alternative is not louder explanations, it's quieter confidence. Imagine you simply said, "I'm starting a business." No disclaimer, no softened edges, no defensive tone, just the truth, clear and solid. That level of clarity doesn't require volume or validation. It stands on its own. And here's what happens when you speak like that. People listen differently. Some may challenge you, some may walk away. But the right people, the ones who operate from courage, not comfort, they lean in, they respect it. Not because they agree, but because they recognize the energy behind it. It's the energy of ownership, of someone who is not waiting for consensus to take the next. That's where your real power lives, not in how well you convince others to agree with you, but in how deeply you commit to your own direction. You don't rise by collecting approval, you rise by moving forward without needing it. And yes, that's hard, because we are wired to seek connection. We are wired to want people to walk with us. But if you have to explain yourself at every turn just to be accepted, you're not walking with people, you're dragging them, and it will wear you down. There's a kind of strength that doesn't announce itself. It just moves. It decides. It shows up. You know it when you see it in others, and you feel it when you finally allow yourself to live that way. Your power isn't in your words, it's in your presence, your steadiness, your refusal to dilute your vision just to make others feel safe. Stop over-explaining. Start standing. You don't owe anyone a reason for doing what lights your soul on fire. You owe yourself the experience of living that fire without apology, because power isn't given, it's reclaimed. Every time you choose truth over explanation, you get a little more of it back. When you stop explaining yourself, something shifts. Not just in how the world sees you, but in how you see yourself. There's a quiet, grounded confidence that starts to build. It's not loud or flashy. It doesn't demand the spotlight, but it's unshakable. Because when you stop needing to explain every move, every decision, every belief, you start trusting that your reasons are enough. And that trust changes everything. You begin to walk into rooms without shrinking. You don't lead with apology or disclaimer. You're not looking around for cues, checking if everyone's okay with who you are. You already know who you are, and people can feel that. They may not know your whole story, but they sense something in your presence. Stability, clarity, conviction. You don't have to prove anything. You just, and with that trust comes the ability to say no, without guilt. That's a massive shift, because for most of us, saying no feels like a rejection of connection. We fear it makes us seem selfish, unkind, or ungrateful. But when you trust yourself, you understand that saying no isn't about pushing others away, it's about protecting what matters. You stop feeling bad for choosing yourself. You stop explaining why a boundary is necessary. You stop writing essays just to walk away from something that no longer serves you. You also start choosing what aligns, even if no one claps. And that might be the hardest part, doing what's right for you without applause. Because so many of us are taught to live for the response. We measure the value of our choices based on how many people cheer. But when you stop explaining yourself, you realize that not every right decision will be popular. Some of your greatest acts of courage will be misunderstood in real time. And that's okay, because you're not looking for validation. You're anchored in alignment. That's the difference between reacting and leading. Leaders move based on internal truth, not external noise. Think about Steve Jobs. He was fired from the very company he built, publicly rejected, humiliated. Most people in that position would have spent years defending themselves, explaining why they were right, telling the world why everyone else was wrong. But he didn't. He didn't go on an apology tour. He didn't fight for attention. He got to work. He poured himself into what he believed in. He founded Pixar, revolutionized animation, came back to Apple, and then against every odd, made it the most valuable company in history. He didn't rise by explaining himself. He rose by doing the work, by trusting what he knew to be true, by letting his actions speak in time. And that's the point. When you stop explaining, you don't lose connection. You gain respect. Maybe not immediately, maybe not from everyone, but from the people who matter. The ones who understand that leadership, integrity and creativity often come with silence, solitude, and decisions that defy the norm. People may not always agree with you. They may not understand your path, but they will respect the way you walk it. Firm, steady, and unapologetic. Because deep trust in yourself is magnetic. It draws the right people in and repels the ones who are only ever there for your performance. So let go of the need to be understood by everyone. Start listening to the voice inside that already knows. The one that doesn't need to explain itself. The one that's been waiting for you to stop asking for permission and start showing up with trust. Because when you do, everything changes. Let's get something straight. Choosing not to explain yourself isn't arrogance. It's not about becoming closed off or refusing to engage. It's about clarity. It's about knowing the difference between explaining to be understood and communicating to be clear. The two may sound similar, but they come from completely different places. One comes from insecurity, the other from self-trust. When you explain, you're often trying to prove something, not just to others but to yourself. You're hoping that if you offer enough reasons, enough logic, enough detail, someone will validate your decision. You're hoping someone will say, okay, that makes sense, now you're allowed. But when you communicate, you're not asking for agreement. You're not trying to be right. You're simply sharing truth. You're offering it, not defending it. That shift changes everything. You move from needing approval to owning your clarity. You stop performing. You stop editing yourself in hopes that someone else will be more comfortable with your choices. And in doing so, you start honoring the most important relationship in your life, the one you have with yourself. You owe people your truth. That's what connection is built on. Honesty, transparent integrity. But you do not owe anyone your justification. You don't owe a detailed explanation for why you're choosing peace over chaos, or why you're walking away from something that once looked perfect on paper, but drained your spirit in silence. You don't owe anyone a timeline for your healing or a spreadsheet for your ambition. You don't have to turn your inner knowing into a courtroom defense. A boundary is not an accusation. It doesn't need to be softened to make someone else feel better about your decision. It's not about them, it's about what you need to stay whole. A career change is not betrayal. It's not a rejection of your past, but a recommitment to your future. And a breakup is not a crime. Choosing yourself is not selfishness. It's survival. Growth rarely looks clean or tidy, and it almost never comes with unanimous approval. But clarity doesn't wait for consensus. It doesn't waver in the face of discomfort. It knows what it needs and it moves forward. Think about the people in your life who you respect the most. The ones who walk with quiet confidence. The ones who live in alignment. Chances are they're not the ones explaining themselves all the time. They're not flooding every decision with disclaimers or footnotes. They're not seeking permission. They're offering presence. And that presence creates space. Space for others to reflect, to grow, to realize that maybe they too can live a little more freely, a little more clearly, a little less apologetically. That's the real beauty of clarity. It liberates not just you but everyone around you. It gives people permission to do the same. When you stop explaining and start owning your path, others see that it's possible to stand firm without being rude, to be clear without being cruel, to move on without making someone the villain. Because clarity isn't about pushing people away, it's about pulling your energy back in. It's about choosing truth over performance, direction over doubt. You don't need to explain why something doesn't feel right anymore. You just need to honor that it doesn't. You don't need to justify why your soul is called somewhere else. You just need to follow the call. You're not here to make every decision look perfect to everyone watching. You're here to make the decisions that are perfect for your growth, even if no one else understands. So speak your truth, communicate with compassion, but let go of the urge to justify what was never theirs to understand. Let clarity be enough. Real rising isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause or a breakthrough moment that makes everything suddenly make sense. Most of the time it happens quietly. So quietly, in fact, that even the people closest to you might miss. It's not a declaration shouted from a rooftop. It's a whisper inside your soul that says, I'm done performing. I'm done explaining. I'm done shrinking to fit into someone else's version of who I should be. Sometimes rising looks like saying no to something you would have once said yes to, just to avoid disappointing someone. But this time you say no, and you don't feel the need to justify it. You don't write a long explanation. You don't replay the conversation in your head afterward, wondering if you could have worded it differently. You simply honor what feels right. That's rising. It looks like deleting the long message you wrote to someone who misunderstood you, who always misunderstands you, and deciding that your peace matters more than their approval. You don't send it. You don't try to rewrite the narrative. You trust that your truth will speak for itself, even if it's never fully understood. That's rising. It looks like walking into a new season of your life, one that may be unfamiliar and uncertain, and saying, "This is what I've chosen," without flinching. You may not have all the answers. You may not know exactly where it's going to lead, but you know one thing: staying where you were was costing you too much, and that quiet knowing becomes your foundation. That's rising. The rising doesn't happen with a spotlight. It happens in stillness. It happens when you choose clarity over chaos, calm over drama, courage over comfort. It happens when you stop negotiating your worth, stop managing other people's expectations, and start living in alignment with what you know deep down to be right for you. There's something powerful that begins to emerge when you let go, when you stop trying to convince people to understand you, when you release the weight of trying to be liked by everyone, or to fit a mold that never quite felt like yours to begin with. It's in that release that you begin to breathe differently, walk differently, decide differently. And people will notice, maybe not right away, maybe not with praise, but they'll feel something different about you. They may not be able to name it, but they'll sense a shift, a quiet confidence, a rooted presence, a steadiness that only comes from having chosen yourself over and over again. You stop chasing validation and start attracting respect, not by demanding it, but by embodying it. And even more importantly, you start respecting yourself. You begin to see your time, your energy, your voice as sacred, not something to be handed out carelessly to anyone who demands it. This isn't about rebellion. It's not about proving anyone wrong. It's about finally letting go of the need to be proven right. It's about choosing peace, even if it looks like distance. Choosing yourself, even if it means walking alone for a while. Because rising isn't about who sees you. It's about who you become in the process of letting go. And that version of you, the one who no longer begs to be understood, the one who leads with clarity instead of permission, that version is unstoppable. That version leads, not because they say the most, but because they live the truest. That's the real rise. And it starts the moment you release what never needed to be carried. So today I want you to ask yourself a question. Not the kind you answer quickly, but the kind that lingers, the kind you carry with you. Where in your life are you still explaining yourself? Where are you still shrinking, still editing, still packaging your truth so it sounds a little safer, a little softer, a little more acceptable? Where are you still offering footnotes for your boundaries, a backstory for your decisions, or a disclaimer for your dream? Maybe it's with your family, the people who love you, but never quite understood you. Maybe every time you choose differently, you feel the need to walk them through it. You try to connect the dots for them, hoping that if you explain it well enough, they'll finally say, "Oh, now I see." Maybe it's with your friends, the ones who knew the old version of you, and now you're changing and you don't want to make them uncomfortable, so you downplay it, you give reasons, you apologize for growing. Or maybe it's with maybe the person you're trying hardest to convince is you. You write the list, you build the case, you explain your decisions out loud, hoping that if you say it the right way it'll feel more certain. But certainty doesn't come from explanation, it comes from alignment. And maybe the reason you still explain is because you're afraid of what will happen if you stop, afraid of the silence that might follow, afraid of who might leave, afraid of what it might mean to finally choose yourself, without asking permission. Would you lose some people? Maybe. But what if those people were only there because you kept making yourself small enough to be loved by them? What if the only thing you really lose is the weight of living for someone else's comfort? What if the loss is actually the beginning? Because the moment you stop explaining yourself is the moment you rise, not in defiance, not in anger, but in truth. That's the kind of rising that lasts, the kind that doesn't need to shout, the kind that doesn't need to be liked to be real. You start walking through life differently, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you've finally accepted that your value was never up for negotiation. Your choices, your dreams, your direction, none of it is up for debate anymore. That's what changes everything. Your life stops being a conversation about what's allowed and becomes a declaration of what's true. There's no more bargaining with your spirit, no more asking others to translate your soul back to you. You stop explaining, you start owning. And when you do, the world begins to meet you where you are, not where you pretend to be. This isn't about becoming hard or distant. It's about becoming honest. It's about choosing integrity over image. It's about letting go of the exhausting need to be understood by everyone, and replacing it with the freedom to be deeply understood by yourself. So again, ask yourself, what would happen if you stopped explaining? What would open up? What would fall away? What would finally be possible? Because the life you want isn't waiting for more explanations. It's waiting for you to rise, and rise you will. The moment you decide that your truth is enough, the moment you stop asking to be seen, and instead choose to stand. So stop explaining, start rising.